You ever feel like you were just extra in your own family? Like no matter what you did, no matter how hard you tried, you were always second place? Well, that's been my entire life. My name is Jake, and for as long as I can remember, my parents have had a favorite child, and it wasn't me. It was my younger sister, Amy. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my sister. She's never been cruel to me, never bullied me or anything. But she was the golden child, and I was just there. I first realized something was off when I was 5. That year, Amy turned 2, and my parents threw her this massive birthday party. I mean, it had everything. Face painters, a bouncy castle, even a petting zoo. Meanwhile, my birthday, a store-bought cake and a quiet dinner at home. It was like the universe was telling me, hey kid, get used to this. And it only got worse as we grew up. Amy got the best clothes, the newest toys, the most attention. When I was 10, I spent months saving up for a new bike, mowing lawns, doing chores, anything to scrape together the money. The day I finally bought it, Amy saw it, threw a tantrum, and guess what? My parents immediately went out and got her an even nicer one. It wasn't just material things either. It was time, effort, support. When Amy had a school recital, my parents were in the front row cheering like she was performing on Broadway. But when I landed the lead role in my 4th grade play, they showed up an hour late and missed my entire scene. Apparently, Amy had a stomach ache. She was fine 5 minutes later. Academically, I was always pushing myself, always striving to impress them. Straight A's, math clubs, science fairs. But my achievements barely got a "that's nice" from them. Meanwhile, when Amy scored a B+ in her worst subject, they took her out to dinner and bought her a brand new phone. High school was even worse. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, became debate team captain, even got selected for an elite summer program at Harvard. I was thrilled. This had to impress them, right? But at dinner, when I shared the news, my dad barely looked up. "That's good," he said. Then he turned to Amy and started talking about her upcoming dance performance. The night I left for Harvard, my parents couldn't even take me to the airport. Why? Because Amy had a recital. I had to ask my friend's parents for a ride. That moment, that crushing realization that I would never be their priority, stuck with me. But despite everything, I built a life for myself. I worked my ass off, got a great job in finance, and by 27, I had even bought my own house. I was proud of myself. My parents? Meh. And then, life threw a curveball. My grandfather passed away. He was a self-made man, started from nothing, built his own business, and he left behind a sizable estate. When his will was read, I was shocked. He had divided everything equally among his grandchildren. That meant I was getting a very generous inheritance. $500,000. I was floored. This money could change my life. It could help me pay off loans, maybe even start my own business. But my parents? Oh, they weren't happy, not one bit. They pulled me aside, all serious, all concerned. They told me it wasn't fair that Amy and I were getting the same amount. She needed it more. She still lived at home. She was struggling. She only worked part-time at a coffee shop. Surely I could understand. And then they hit me with it. "You should do the right thing and give Amy your share." I almost laughed. My share? The money Grandpa left me? I told them no. And just like that, the mask came off. They called me selfish, ungrateful. They reminded me of every little thing they had ever done for me, buying me school supplies, letting me live at home during college, paying for my braces. You know, the bare minimum of parenting. I stood my ground, and that's when my dad decided he was just going to take my inheritance, rewrite Grandpa's wishes. But what he didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Grandpa had seen this coming, and he had left behind one final surprise. Growing up, I learned pretty fast that my parents saw me as secondary, like an afterthought. It wasn't that they didn't love me, at least I don't think so. It was just that, compared to Amy, I barely existed. When Amy wanted something, she got it. When I wanted something, I had to work for it. If I managed to get it on my own, well, then Amy suddenly needed it too, and what do you know? She'd get a better version. That bike I saved up for when I was 10, the one I mowed lawns for, counted every penny of my allowance for? Yeah, that lasted about a week before Amy decided she wanted one too, except instead of saving, she cried about it. And my parents? They rushed out that very weekend and bought her one, shinier, newer, better than mine. It stung. Not just the bike, though that was bad enough, but the message behind it. Your effort doesn't matter. Your hard work doesn't matter. Amy comes first. I remember the day that really solidified things for me. It was 4th grade. I had landed the lead role in our school play, something I had worked so hard for. I practiced my lines every night. My teacher even told me she was proud of how much effort I put in. The night of the performance, I was buzzing with excitement. I scanned the audience, expecting to see my parents sitting in the front row. They weren't there. I told myself they were just running late. I kept glancing at the door, hoping, praying, they'd walk in before my big moment. But they didn't. I went on stage, performed my heart out, and when it was all over, I rushed outside, hoping to finally see them. They arrived an hour late. Apparently, Amy had a stomachache earlier in the evening, and they stayed home to comfort her. Never mind that she was completely fine now. We lost track of time, my mom said with an apologetic smile. We'll make it up to you, my dad promised. They never did. But you know what they did make time for? Amy's ballet recital the following week. They showed up early, front row, flowers in hand. They cheered like she had just won an Olympic medal. And me? I just sat there, watching, knowing full well that I'd never get that kind of support. Academic success? Still not enough. By the time I hit high school, I had stopped expecting their approval. But some stupid part of me still hoped for it. I poured myself into my studies. Straight A's, math club, debate team captain. I figured, if I just accomplish enough, they'll have to notice me, right? Wrong. The only time they ever commented on my grades was when they warned me not to get a big head about it. Meanwhile, Amy, she barely scraped by with a C average, and they celebrated every single small victory like she had just cured cancer. When she scored a B+ in her weakest subject, they took her out to dinner and bought her a brand new phone as a reward. I got into an elite summer program at Harvard. My dad barely looked up from his plate when I told him at dinner. That's nice, my mom said. But don't let it get to your head. Then, without missing a beat, Dad turned to Amy and started talking about her upcoming dance performance. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what more I could possibly do to earn their attention. The answer? Nothing. And I learned that the hard way the night I left for Harvard. It was the biggest opportunity of my life. I was flying out to attend a program that could open so many doors for me. I was excited, nervous, ready for this next step. And my parents? They couldn't take me to the airport. Amy had a recital that same night. I had to call my friend's parents to drive me instead. I should have been surprised. I should have been upset. But honestly, I wasn't. I was just tired. That was the night I officially gave up trying to be their priority. I was done chasing their approval, done hoping for something I'd never get. From that moment on, I decided I would live for myself. I worked my ass off in college, graduated with honors, landed a great job in finance, and by the time I was 27, I had bought my own house. And you know what? My parents didn't care. Not really. They didn't congratulate me, didn't celebrate, didn't even seem particularly interested, because to them, no matter how successful I became, I would always be second place. But then, just when I had made peace with that, a curveball hit. My grandfather passed away, and in his will he did something no one saw coming. My grandfather was a man of few words, But when he spoke, people listened. He had built his business from the ground up, one of those self-made success stories you only hear about in movies. He never flaunted his wealth, never acted superior. He believed in earning what you had, not just being handed things. And more importantly, he believed in fairness. I always admired him for that. So when he passed away, it was a heavy loss for the entire family. I didn't expect anything from his will. I figured whatever inheritance there was would go to my dad and his siblings. That's how these things usually go, right? Wrong. When the will was read, I nearly fell out of my chair. Grandpa had divided everything equally among his children and his grandchildren. I was getting $500,000, $500,000. I couldn't believe it. This money. It meant something. It was a chance to pay off my student loans, to invest in my future, maybe even start my own business one day. But my parents? Oh, they weren't happy. You should give your share to Amy. I remember the way they pulled me aside after the will reading. My mom's face was tight like she was trying to contain something. My dad had that "we need to have a talk" expression. Jake, my mom started carefully. Don't you think it's a little unfair? I frowned. What do you mean? Well, my dad said, crossing his arms, Amy needs that money more than you do. I blinked. Excuse me? Jake, be reasonable, my mom pressed. You have a good job. You bought a house. You're doing fine. But Amy, she's struggling. She's still living at home. She's only working part-time. Wouldn't it be the right thing to do? To help your sister? I just stared at them. It took a moment for it to really sink in. They weren't asking me to share my inheritance. They were asking me to hand over the entire thing. To just give it up. Because Amy needed it more. And for the first time in my life, I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It wasn't even an amused one. It was sharp, bitter. Because of course, they would say this. No, I said simply. Their faces dropped. No, my dad repeated, like he couldn't believe I'd actually said it. No, I said again, firmer this time. Grandpa left me this money. It's mine. I'm not giving it to Amy. I might as well have slapped them. The guilt trip begins. Jake, don't be selfish, my mom scolded. Selfish? I repeated. Are you serious? You're asking me to give away $500,000 and I'm the selfish one? That's when my dad started listing every single thing they had ever done for me. We bought you braces. We paid for your school supplies. We let you live at home during college. Like these were luxuries instead of basic parental responsibilities. And yet somehow they conveniently forgot about the car they bought Amy when she graduated high school, the shopping sprees they took her on, the fact that they still supported her financially at 25 years old. They didn't see that as spoiling, that was just helping Amy. But me keeping my own inheritance? That was selfish. Dad's next move. Just take it anyway. When guilt tripping didn't work, my dad decided he was just going to take my inheritance. See, he was the executor of Grandpa's will. He had control over how things were distributed, and in his mind, that meant he could just reallocate things as he saw fit. Grandpa would have wanted this, he told me, like that was supposed to convince me. If he had known how much Amy needed the money, he would have changed the will. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You can't just rewrite Grandpa's will because you don't like it, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not rewriting it, my dad argued. I'm interpreting it. That was it. That was the moment I realized my dad would do whatever it took to make sure Amy got what she wanted, even if it meant stealing from his own son. And that's when I knew I needed backup. So I went to the one person who always played fair. Grandma. The bombshell revelation. When I told my grandma what was happening, she went silent. And then she got mad. Like really mad. He has no right to change the will, she said firmly. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. A few years ago, my parents had already tried to convince Grandpa to give everything to Amy. They had literally asked him to change his will to leave her everything. But Grandpa had refused. He had told them, in no uncertain terms, that all of his grandchildren would be treated equally, and he was so firm about it that he even included a clause in his will. Anyone who tried to contest the inheritance would lose their share entirely. I was stunned. He had seen this coming. He had known my parents would try to take what wasn't theirs, and he had made sure they couldn't. The turning point, armed with this knowledge, I went back to my parents. "Grandpa already told you no," I said, "and he put it in writing. If you try to take my inheritance, you'll lose yours too." For the first time in my life, I saw something I never thought I'd see. Fear. My dad blanched. My mom opened her mouth and closed it. They had been caught. They knew they had no legal ground, and just like that, their plans started falling apart. But they weren't going down without a fight. And what happened next? Let's just say the family was about to be ripped apart. Silence. That's all I heard after I told my parents about Grandpa's clause. For the first time in my life, they were speechless. My dad's face was tight, his jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. My mom looked like she had been caught stealing from a charity box, because, well, she had. They had tried to take money that wasn't theirs, and they had just realized that if they pushed any further, they could lose everything. We were just looking out for Amy. The excuses started immediately. "Jake, we were only thinking about your sister's future. You don't understand. Life is harder for her. We just wanted things to be fair." Fair? They had the nerve to talk about fairness? "You were going to steal my inheritance and give it to Amy," I shot back. "How is that fair?" "Well, Grandpa didn't know how much Amy needed it," my dad grumbled. Then, "Why didn't he change the will?" I challenged. Silence again. They had no answer for that, because the truth was, Grandpa did know. He knew exactly how my parents were. He knew exactly what they would try to do, and that's why he made damn sure they couldn't. Amy's reaction, silent approval. I glanced at Amy, hoping, praying she would say something, that she would stand up and tell them to stop, that she didn't want my money, but she just sat there, eyes downcast, biting her lip, and then she shrugged. "Mom and Dad know best," she muttered. I felt something in my chest tighten. It wasn't even anger. It was just exhaustion. She had been coddled her whole life, spoon-fed everything she ever wanted. She didn't know how to stand up for herself, because she had never needed to. And because of that, she was perfectly fine letting them do this to me. Maybe she felt guilty, maybe not. But either way, she wasn't going to stop them. And that hurt. Grandma takes action the next day. Grandma called. "Me, I've had enough," she said. She had already contacted the other executor of the will, a lawyer Grandpa had appointed to oversee everything, and she had also reached out to my dad's siblings. See, my dad might have been the executor, but he wasn't the only one with a say in things. And now? He had a lot of angry people demanding answers. The family confrontation we gathered at my aunt's house. The tension was thick. My uncles and aunts weren't stupid. They saw exactly what was happening. "Why the hell would you try to change the will?" My uncle snapped at my dad. "I wasn't changing it," my dad grumbled. "I was adjusting it." "That's illegal," my aunt shot back. "It's what Dad would have wanted," my mom tried. "No, it's what you wanted," Grandma interjected. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. But somehow, she commanded the room. "Your father made his decision, and you tried to go behind his back. That's not just wrong. It's disgraceful." For a second, I thought my dad was going to argue. But then Grandma pulled out the receipts, letters Grandpa had written, notes from conversations they'd had, documents proving he had refused to change the will, despite my parents' insistence. She laid it all out. And my dad, He had nothing left to say. The fallout begins. Within a week, my dad was removed as executor of the will. My inheritance was protected. The law was on my side. And my parents, they were furious. But they couldn't do a damn thing about it. Instead, they turned to the one weapon they always used against me, guilt. You've turned the family against us. How could you do this to us, Jake? My mom sobbed. You humiliated us in front of the whole family. After everything we've done for you? You're the reason this family is falling apart. My dad? He was even worse. Fine, he spat. Take your money. But don't expect another damn thing from us. You're out of the will. And if you take that money, you are not welcome in this house again. I swallowed hard. This was it. This was the final line in the sand. I could give in, hand over my inheritance, let them win, and keep the peace, or I could stand my ground and lose my parents forever. My decision, standing my ground. I took a deep breath, and I chose myself. Then I guess I won't be coming back, I said quietly, and I walked out the door. The aftermath. A family torn. Apart, some of my cousins took my side. Others said I should have just let it go. Family is more important than money, Jake. Amy, she stayed silent. But a few weeks later, something changed. She called me. I'm sorry, she said softly. I should have stood up for you. And for the first time in her life, she finally did. She told our parents she was going back to school, that she wanted to be independent, that she didn't want to live in their basement forever, and you know what? That scared them more than anything. Because without Amy relying on them, without me needing their approval, they had no control left. It took a few weeks for the dust to settle. My parents weren't speaking to me. Family gatherings were tense with awkward silences and judgmental glances. My dad's siblings were furious with him, and some of my cousins were still debating whether I had done the right thing. But the biggest surprise? Amy. The golden child. The one who had always been sheltered, spoiled, protected. For the first time in her life, she chose to think for herself, and it shook everything. Amy's apology. I should have stood up for you. I was sitting in my apartment. One evening when my phone rang, Amy. I almost didn't answer, but something in me told me to pick up. Hey, she said quietly. I waited. I wanted to say I'm sorry. That caught me off guard. For what? I asked cautiously. For not standing up for you. For letting Mom and Dad do what they did. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to fight them. There was something raw in her voice. Something real. You didn't have to fight them, Amy, I said, sighing. But you didn't have to stand by and let it happen either. I know, she admitted. I was scared. I didn't want to lose their approval. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? She had spent her whole life needing them, needing their validation, their support, their love. And now, for the first time ever, she was questioning whether it was worth it. Amy's big decision, choosing independence. A week after our call, Amy made a shocking announcement. She told our parents she was going to college. She wanted to build something for herself. No more living in their basement. No more part-time job at a coffee shop with no future. She wanted to stand on her own, and she was going to use her inheritance to pay for it. Mom and Dad lost it. Why would you waste that money? My dad demanded. You don't need college, my mom insisted. You have everything you need right here. And that was exactly the problem. They had made sure she never needed anything, never struggled, never grew, and now she was stepping out of their control, and they hated it. Mom's realization. Did we do something wrong? At first, my parents tried everything to stop her. They guilt-tripped her, begged her to stay home, even offered to pay her if she didn't go. But for once, Amy didn't cave, and something about that shook my mom to her core. I guess it was the first time she saw the damage they had done. Not just to me, but to Amy, too. Did we do something wrong? she asked my grandmother one afternoon. Grandma didn't sugarcoat it. You spent years treating Jake like he was second best, she told her. And you spent just as long making sure Amy couldn't survive without you. That hit hard, and slowly, something changed. Mom started going to therapy. She started reaching out, carefully, hesitantly, trying to mend things with me. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time she was trying. Dad, however, was a lost cause. While my mom was starting to see the truth, my dad, he doubled down. He was still angry, still convinced I had betrayed the family. You and Amy are both ungrateful, he told me. When he realized he couldn't control Amy anymore, he barely spoke to her. And me? I might as well have been dead to him. At one point, he even threatened to sell our childhood home out of spite, just to make sure Amy and I had nothing left to come back to. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I had spent my whole life chasing his approval. And now, I was finally free. The new normal. A family rebuilt. Without him. Over the next few months, Amy and I grew closer than we had ever been. We started a new tradition, Siblings Day, where we do something fun together. No parents, no expectations, just us. One month we went hiking. Another, we had a movie marathon. It was the first time in our lives that our relationship wasn't defined by favoritism. It was just real. Mom was making slow progress. She still had a long way to go, but at least she was trying. Dad? He chose to isolate himself. He missed birthdays, holidays, family gatherings. He refused to be in the same room as me, and you know what? That was his choice, not mine. I wasn't going to beg for a relationship that had always been one-sided. For the first time ever, I was choosing myself. Moving forward, using my inheritance. The right way with my inheritance, I did more than just pay off my student loans. I invested. I planned for my future. But the most important thing, I used some of that money for therapy, for both Amy and me, because we were both carrying scars from our childhood. She had been smothered. I had been neglected. And we were both finally learning how to heal. One day, I even had an idea. What if I used some of my inheritance to start something bigger? A community center. A place that offered mental health support, financial literacy workshops, and resources for kids who had grown up in toxic family environments. A place that could help others the way I wished I had been helped. It was just an idea for now, but for the first time, I felt like I had purpose, and I wasn't going to waste it. Final thoughts. Breaking the cycle. Looking back, I realized something. I spent so many years trying to be enough for my parents, trying to prove my worth. But I was always enough. They just refused to see it, and that's not my burden to carry anymore. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I will never repeat the cycle. If I ever have kids, they will never have to question whether they are loved equally. They will never feel like second place, and they will never have to fight for what's already theirs. Because family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, and I finally respect myself.